Hello there, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this session where we are going to look at procurement's role in championing innovation. So with optimism in the air in many parts of the world, though not all economies, it does seem natural to be thinking about growth. And that's why Mark Masterson, the Regional Vice President EMEA at TealBook, is going to tell us how to position our organisations for success. Please send in your questions for Mark as he's speaking, and there will be time at the end to run through them. But in the meantime, over to you, Mark.
Thank you, Rob. Let me just share my screen and I'll be right with you. Can you see that, Rob? Does that work? Hold on. Yeah, good. Great. Well, look, thank you everybody for joining the session today. I've got about 25 minutes here, including time for questions. And as Rob said, please do submit your questions. We'll try to answer what we can in the session itself. If we don't get to it, then please visit the TealBook booth and we'll be able to carry the conversation forward there. Really, the session today is about the relationship between getting much more visibility into your suppliers and procurement's growing involvement in supporting innovation within companies. We'll be using some of the learnings from a study called On Solid Ground, which we commissioned recently with our partners at Wakefield Research. And we're going to use that to flesh out and validate some of what we're saying and what we're proposing here. The report actually covers many aspects of supplier information management, so please do go to the TealBook booth for a copy if you want a broader view of what we think about this area. Okay, so in terms of the research itself, we actually last year we also produced research in collaboration with Wakefield Research, and a report came out in March just prior to the pandemic really grabbing hold of everything. At that point, we'd interviewed upwards of 200 procurement leaders across a wide range of companies. And we were quite interested to see that 81% of them weren't completely confident in their supplier data. It was one of the key findings from last year's report. Obviously, this year, we wanted to really dive into that, unpack it a bit further, and of course, follow consequences and developments in this year of chaos and turmoil and everything that we've experienced through the COVID pandemic period. So we commissioned the research again, and one of the key findings out was, guess what, 82% of procurement leaders have actually validated in real time, in a real crisis scenario, that their supplier data wasn't completely adequate for the task. I think this really just accelerates the trend that we're seeing over a longer period than this, where supplier information management has been seen as a tricky, difficult subject, something that is impeding companies' ability to make data-led decisions and really build strategies around true information, reliable information. So COVID has actually become a showcase on disruption, really, and a stress test for that really revealed a lot of weakness. Over many decades, companies have spent massive amounts of money on software to underpin their procurement processes, and that software really shifts data from one place to another to support different steps in those processes. But what hasn't changed and what hasn't been fixed is the data that underpins it. We can shift it along, but we don't seem to have really got to grips with the data itself and making it as good as it needs to be for all the different needs that procurement organizations have to support these days. And of course, with disruption coming in from all sides over the last period, really without good data, no matter what contingency plans you've got in place, they're just too hard to implement in real time. So companies, and we've seen it all over the place, they end up scrambling to react to almost impossible situations. At the beginning of the pandemic, we actually made an offer to the market for any impacted company to come to us, and we try and provide them with a supplier list for whatever goods and services they were trying to discover. Within the first 2 weeks of that, we got 170 requests from all kinds of companies asking for all kinds of support and help. For example, Brook Brothers, they were actually swiveling their production to deliver N95 standard masks to the market in a help to combat this the COVID problem. But they'd never sourced polypropylene before. Where do you find that if you've never sourced it before? Have you got suppliers already under contract that could provide that for you? If you haven't, you have to go out to the wider market. Where in the wider market? Have you got local suppliers to where you need to consume this stuff? And not just polypropylene, but of course many, many other things as well that it would take to create effectively a totally new supply chain for totally new products that your company hasn't had any experience of. And we found that across the board, companies swiveling to produce ventilators, companies producing PPE for the first time, companies just looking for PPE in order to protect their employees and keep their businesses running. All over the place, these things happened. What this really led to, I think, and you can see it on the right-hand side of this chart here, is that the research showed that 96% of the respondents actually confirmed that agility is now more important than cost savings. We've seen this, of course, coming up again over many, many years, but I think really it's been totally accelerated now because people have been able to see all of those ideas about resilience, all of those ideas about being able to turn on a dime and that kind of thing. Now they come to the fore, and now you can see when crisis hits, agility becomes far more important. Obviously, spend data doesn't go away and focus on cost doesn't go away, but this has always been a primary area for procurement leaders. And part of the reason is obviously mandates and objectives from management, but also it's easy, okay? It's the easier part of this whole piece. It's quantifiable, it's got KPIs that you can put in place and that kind of thing. When it came to COVID, cost was not the primary concern. Okay, the primary concern was ensuring that you could get goods and services where they needed to be. It involved finding local alternatives. It involved building resilience into the supply chains. It involved understanding the capabilities of your supply base and the wider supply base as well. So suddenly agility comes to the fore in a way that perhaps it hasn't been quite so recognized before. Of course, it's not just COVID that's done this. This trend has been going on for a while. Many other more recent drivers within companies, recent initiatives and plans have also driven the move towards focus on agility, sustainability, recreating your supply chain so they can be more sustainable, looking at full loop sustainable programs, diversity, bringing more inclusion into the business. All of these things require agility, require responding to changing consumer demands and expectations and so on. Hyper competitiveness in a networked world, driving innovation, of course, and how that will be. So we see all of these different drivers for agility, which mean that we weren't terribly surprised to see such a big statement here about 96% of people. So how does innovation fit into all of that? First, I'd like to thank Mr. Mike Cheney. He actually joined a webinar recently with my CEO and founder, Stephanie Lapierre, and he presented this schematic here, which is really a way to show the elements of a balanced supply chain design. It's got 3 prongs to it. It's a triangle, so it's got cost of goods. As we've mentioned before, this is obviously the piece that many companies start with. It's got agility in there, of course, where we're really looking at the ability to respond to the customer, to respond to those changing demands. And it's got the innovation piece as the third leg of that stool, okay? By innovation, this could be many things, right? It could be innovation that supports agility, bringing new sustainability approaches into your agenda there. It could be innovation that helps drive down the cost of goods, or it could be, of course, innovation that keeps your own goods and services at the top end, keeping them differentiated in the market, allowing you to really outcompete your competitors in this hyper-competitive world. The question then, of course, becomes, where does that innovation come from? It was great to see Dave Ingram speaking in the keynote this morning, and I was listening for keywords that he said during that, and he did mention co-sharing innovation as one of the things that they do in parts of the world. Of course, in a huge organization like Unilever, everything I could think of they're doing or thinking about or considering anyway. But it was great to see that there, because it's clear that it's a long, long time since companies could say that all innovation happened in-house. In fact, a substantial proportion of it happens outside the walls of your organization. And that's okay, for your top 10, your top 20 suppliers, the guys that you spend a lot of money with, you know them really, really well. You know their CEOs, you certainly know what their capabilities are. You're probably already doing some level of innovation and forward planning with these guys to make sure that everything that they've got can contribute to the success of what you're doing together. But big companies have got thousands of suppliers, right? And it's often in that broader supplier community that surprises happen, both good and bad. And in fact, it's also in that community that innovation is sitting, waiting to be tapped. Okay, if you think of small, medium enterprises, if you think of startups, if you think of diverse companies where perhaps they have a particular insight into particular niche markets in these things, there's a ton of innovation waiting to be tapped out there. And it sits in companies that by their very nature are hard to uncover, discover, recognize. So just bear that piece in mind as we move forward on this, but we want to talk about how do you get to that bigger picture? How do you bring in this wider, by far increase the scope and potential for bringing innovation in from third parties? Of course, the diagram that we're showing here, it does have some implied tensions within it. Cost of goods, you know, we all know procurement professionals, we know that one of the first things they often do in their programs is to consolidate their supplier base, to look for volume-based discounts by bringing their spend together, to reduce the number of suppliers just to stop the ongoing management of all of those supplier records and the problems that come with that. So there's a pressure at the top of this triangle to reduce the supply base. However, in terms of agility and resilience, you want to make sure that you've got alternatives to your key suppliers, that if something goes wrong, you can swap them out quickly and move somewhere else. Reshoring may be one of the things that you're doing. You need to do similar things with that. And for innovation, as we've said, you know, you want to be able to tap as broad a potential as you can, because you don't know where the next disruptive thing is going to come from. So it's always useful, if possible, to keep a tab on all of that potential. The idea of the diagram is it's balanced and it flexes depending on your needs at certain times, of course. But it's generally more balanced towards the cost aspect of it, simply because managing all of that information at scale to really impact agility, to really impact innovation is hard because the data foundations and fundamentals aren't there. So if we go back to the research briefly, I think if you go with my story and you accept that, you know, data is an issue and that many companies recognize that inadequate data has been a problem, then we can look at this and see that the respondents also gave supplier innovation as the top concern about the quality of that data. So they're recognizing that there's something that they're missing in order to drive their innovation programs, in order to drive the next phases of development of their companies, by not being able to tap into that pool because the data quality isn't there. And as I said, you know, the innovations can be sitting in small and diverse suppliers. What do they offer? How can you find those suppliers, incubate them, nourish and sustain the future stars that could bring real ground-changing capabilities into your organization, these niche market specialists, right? And that's just within your own supply base, all of that long tail of suppliers that may already be under contract for you. What about out in the broader world? How can you find those ones, equivalent suppliers to the ones you already have, or completely new ones for new products and services that you're thinking of getting into? It's a big challenge, and really it can only be done not with traditional approaches. We would say that you need to really rethink from the ground up and create a data-first approach to what you do. If you can create what we call the data foundation, then you can really start to shine a light on all of that complexity, all of that diversity, and all of that scale. Okay, you can bring in data points that you may not have been able to see before, and you can build insights based upon that that can really help drive these innovation programs. The great thing is, of course, is if you do this in the right way, you can align this with other corporate initiatives right now. And again, I'll come back to diversity because it's a great example of how the synergies can be between these things. With diversity, you're bringing inclusion into the company. You're looking for organizations that you can, maybe you haven't tapped before, bringing these in and helping balance out, making sure you haven't got groupthink at every level within the organization, right? But of course, as we've discussed, when you bring them in, you're also opening yourselves up to other potential areas of innovation. So a good diversity program allows you to open up your business to companies you may not have dealt with before, which in turn allows you to access innovations that you would never have been able to access before as well. Win-win-win is how I would see that. So building this mythical foundation that we're alluding to here, well, you know, we as a company at TealBook, we talk to lots of CPOs and procurement leaders. In fact, my CEO and founder, she talks to CPOs every day of the week. And, you know, data is always on their minds. It's always part of what they want to talk about. and in the context of the infrastructure battles that they're facing across their procurement activities. They've got multiple systems, each of those a data silo in effect, and they're looking at how they can bring these together, create data lakes, data layers across the business that will help them sort of sort out this complexity and find some diamonds in all of that rough. But they still suffer from the fact that they have to maintain all of that data, that they have to bring supplier information in, even base data that they've got to come into portals, they've got to do it all on their own. And the data begins to degrade quite quickly, and it's just a problem, as it always has been, to manage it at scale. Of course, it's still a step forward. You get some insights, but it's only insights on data that you're already collecting within the organization. It's kind of a case of you only know what you know. Similarly with spend analytics, one portion of all of that. Great solutions out there, focused again on the cost aspects really of what procurement does. But even if the data foundations aren't good, they will be suboptimal, and the insights that you get from them will not be as you need them to be. We clearly need to go beyond spend. We need to look at risk, we need to look at trends, we need to look at capabilities, we need to look at all sorts of things, much of which can only come from external data. And so therefore it can't be sort of gathered together in standard systems. A true data foundation would replace or augment that data lake idea. It would bring intelligence, automation. It would allow you to merge internal and external data together. It would ideally learn, adapt, become more predictive the more that you use it. And it would allow you to handle data at scale so that you can get more supplier intelligence and therefore a bigger view of innovation potential across the business. I should say before kind of wrapping up on this, you do need to start this now. I think the pandemic has shown us that people were not ready, their data was not in the correct state, the old methods hadn't worked for them, and really it's time to start thinking radically about a data-first approach and how you can really change the way you go about this, because who knows when the next piece is, and who knows what the next initiative is that might need this. Okay, so really just to bring it all together and tell you, summarize how we think procurement can become a real innovation champion in all of this. Hopefully you agree with me that supplier data is a big issue for companies. I've actually been in the business for 25 years. I must have touched at least 200 different procurement technology deployments in that time. And I would hand on heart say that not every single one of them has been compromised in some way by the quality of data, the inability to maintain and refresh and extend and just manage the stuff, right? So that's always been a problem, and the pandemic has really just shone a light on that and perhaps pushed it up the priorities a little bit. We can also understand in lessons learned this year that a strong, resilient, future-proof supply chain needs to balance cost of goods with agility and support for innovation. Hopefully you also agree with me that your supply base and your potential suppliers are a major source of that innovation. But then that poor data inhibits your ability to access those suppliers and their information to give you the innovation that you want. So creating a strong data foundation can increase your access to new sources of innovation to support your business, while at the same time supporting many of the other initiatives that are so important to a modern company. Thank you very much for your time on this, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mark. That's been really interesting. There's plenty of food for thought there. If you have questions for Mark, we've got a few minutes, so do send them across using the Q&A facility, and if there's time, we will put them to him. But first of all, Mark, let me ask you about innovative suppliers. What are the characteristics of an innovative supplier?
You know what, that's a great question. And I think the whole point of what I've said here is we don't know. It's a case of you don't know what you don't know, right? So the idea for us is to surface up in as broad a way as possible, across as big a pool of suppliers as possible, the kind of capabilities that they're known for, okay? Picking out and teasing out things that you may have missed within your day-to-day relationships with these guys. But it could be anything. The whole point is that when you ask the question, you should be able to find suppliers that can give you the answer. So we don't know what an innovative supplier is. We don't know, sitting somewhere in in a veteran-owned company in the Midwest of America, whether there's an innovation there that one or two companies are already using but you haven't heard about. How do you get that surfaced up to you when you're looking for a particular capability for whatever your program might be?
And this question about supplier information, which I suspect will resonate with a lot of people.
Sure.
It's a big question. If you don't have sufficient supplier information, how do you begin to fix that?
Yeah, it's always I'm a vendor. I work in a company called TealBook, so we have a particular view of that. So I'm trying not to position it too much around that. But I think, obviously, the big change that's happened that allows companies like ours to come to the fore in this way is that technologies have reached this AI, machine learning, automation, big data piece. And we see supplier information as a truly big data problem. And you need modern big data tools in order to do that. It's still not simple. And this is a journey that people will go in. It's not going to be fixed overnight. Okay. But certainly taking that big data approach, looking at the types of tools and techniques that are required to manage and sift and find insights within that data is what we're recommending, and is really the only way to solve this once and for all, I think.
And a question that's coming here around the concept of innovation being applied to government procurement.
Right. I mean, so, when I showed that triangle, that was from Mike Cheney, who's worked in Procter & Gamble and other big CPG companies and many companies like that. And of course, it was quite a product-focused view that he had of things. But clearly, innovation comes in all sorts of ways. And I've seen in my 25 years, particularly in the procurement space, I've seen public sector be on the back foot, then come to the forefront, if you like. And then, so sometimes it's in the lead, sometimes it isn't. But I would say that innovation of services, innovation of delivery, these are all things where third parties can support government, right? These are all capabilities that they might want to get from their existing supply base or others as well. So I do think that there's, it's a different type of innovation, I suppose, but there's still, even in marketing, for example, even in outreach to people, there are vendors that you would need to support you as a public sector entity to achieve those pieces. Some of those vendors might be people you've not worked with before. Some of them might have new capabilities, new ideas for innovation that you can take on, incubate, and make part of the service that you offer to your public.
And just a final thought then, at a time when many organisations are focused very heavily on cost, how do you shift the conversation to justify a focus on innovation?
Yeah, it's again, these topics, we pretend they live in isolation from each other, but of course they don't. Agility and innovation are going to help with your cost drives as well. It's just the emphasis of the focus and the tools that you might apply to it. But I wouldn't expect innovation to just go off into the stratosphere on its own, although of course it does have a big impact on the top line. But clearly a lot of innovation will happen, which will particularly bring in suppliers in. Your tier ones are going to often, I mean, procurement guys know this, they put into their contracts that that their suppliers have to reduce their costs of delivering that service over time by innovating themselves. So in some ways, they've already embedded some aspect of that in there. But certainly, I don't see these in isolation. That triangle is supposed to be a balance, and there's an ebb and flow of priority and emphasis as you go along.
Well, Mark, it has been fascinating hearing from you. I'm sure we could have carried on for much longer, and thank you for sending in your questions. So thank you, Mark, for your time. Thank you, everybody, for sending in your questions and for watching today. Enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.